You don't feel too deeply because you're weak. You feel too deeply because you see what others avoid. Some people don't wake up and ease into the day. They wake up already alert, already scanning, already feeling. Their nervous system doesn't have an off switch. It's always listening, always interpreting, always reacting. A slight change in tone, a pause that lasts half a second too long, a look that doesn't match the words. They notice it all, not because they want to, but because their body learned early that awareness was safer than innocence. For them, the world is not just experienced, it's absorbed. This constant alertness often begins quietly. In childhood, they may have learned to read the room before speaking, to sense emotional shifts before conflict arrived. Maybe love was unpredictable. Maybe safety depended on understanding moods before they exploded or disappeared. Over time, the nervous system adapted. Hyper-awareness became normal. What others call sensitivity is actually a deeply conditioned survival response. Their body learned that missing details had consequences, so now it refuses to miss anything. As adults, this shows up as overthinking, emotional exhaustion, and an inability to relax fully. Even in calm moments, there's a subtle tension beneath the surface. Their mind keeps checking, is everything okay? Did I say something wrong? Why did their energy change? This isn't insecurity, it's vigilance. Their system is constantly processing emotional data, most of it unspoken, most of it invisible to others. And because the processing never stops, rest feels unfamiliar, almost unsafe. They feel emotions not as passing states, but as full-body experiences. Anxiety doesn't just live in the mind, it tightens the chest. Sadness doesn't drift through, it settles in the bones. Joy is intense, but fleeting, because the nervous system is always waiting for the shift that follows. Even silence can feel loud. Even peace can feel temporary. This depth of sensation makes life vivid, but also overwhelming. People often tell them to calm down or stop thinking so much, not realizing that this isn't a habit they can drop. It's a system that's been wired this way. Their brain doesn't prioritize comfort, it prioritizes meaning and safety. So it searches constantly, it analyzes, it connects dots that others don't even see. This is why they're often intuitive, empathetic, and emotionally intelligent, but also why they burn out faster than most. Over time, living in this heightened state comes at a cost. The body gets tired of being on guard. Emotional fatigue builds quietly. They may start to feel detached, numb, or strangely empty, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much for too long without release. Their depth turns inward, self-doubt grows. They wonder why life feels heavier for them than it seems to for everyone else. Yet within this constant alertness lies something powerful. They perceive truths others overlook. They sense undercurrents beneath words. They understand pain without needing it explained. Their nervous system may be overworked, but it is also finely tuned. The danger isn't their depth, it's living without learning how to protect it. Without boundaries, awareness becomes self-destruction. With understanding, it becomes insight. They were never meant to harden, they were meant to learn when to lower the guard. Awareness without rest becomes a quiet form of suffering. For people who feel deeply, connection is never casual. They don't enter conversations lightly, and they don't attach without meaning. Small talk feels like standing at the edge of something hollow, repeating words that don't touch anything real. They listen, they respond, they even smile. But inside there's a quiet disconnect. Not because they think they're above others, but because they're searching for depth in a world that often prefers comfort over truth. This is where isolation begins, slowly and almost invisibly. They are surrounded by people, yet rarely met. They crave emotional resonance, not constant interaction. They want to be understood without having to translate themselves into something smaller. But most relationships operate on the surface, and for someone who lives beneath it, that creates a constant sense of being slightly out of place, like they're speaking a language few are fluent in. Over time, they learn to hold back. They soften their words, dilute their emotions, edit their thoughts before sharing them, not because they're dishonest, but because experience has taught them that too much honesty makes people uncomfortable. Depth can feel threatening, intensity can feel like pressure. So they adapt. They become quieter versions of themselves, hoping to be easier to be around, even if it means being less real. Loneliness for them isn't about being alone in a room. It's about being unseen in a crowd. It's the ache of knowing that parts of them remain untouched, unrecognized, uninvited. They can laugh with others and still feel empty afterward. They can be loved and still feel misunderstood. This kind of loneliness doesn't scream. It hums in the background, constant and unresolved. They often form deep inner worlds as a way to cope. Imagination, creativity, introspection become safe spaces where they don't have to explain their depth. This is why many of them are drawn to art, writing, music, or solitude. Not because they dislike people, but because these spaces don't ask them to be less than they are. In solitude, their depth finally has room to breathe. But isolation carries its own weight. When depth goes unshared for too long, it can turn inward. Thoughts loop, feelings intensify, self-reflection slowly becomes self-criticism. They start wondering if something is wrong with them for needing more than most, if they're too much, if they're simply not built for this world. And the more they question themselves, the more distant they feel from others. Still, this distance is not a flaw, it's a signal. It points to a mismatch, not a deficiency. They aren't meant to connect everywhere. They're meant to connect deeply, selectively, rarely. The pain comes from trying to belong in spaces that were never designed to hold their depth. When they stop forcing connection and start honoring resonance, isolation loses some of its power. They don't need many people. They need one real mirror. Depth isolates until it is recognized. For those who feel deeply, pain rarely feels meaningless. In fact, it often feels like proof that something mattered, proof that the connection was real, proof that they were alive inside it. When emotions run deep, intensity becomes familiar, and suffering quietly earns a place of importance. Over time, pain stops feeling like a warning sign and starts feeling like a confirmation that they're on the right path. This belief doesn't come from nowhere. Many of them learned early that love was complicated, conditional, or inconsistent. Affection may have arrived wrapped in confusion, guilt, or emotional unpredictability, so their nervous system learned to associate closeness with discomfort, warmth with anxiety. Are with the risk of loss. When pain accompanies love enough times, the two become psychologically fused. As adults, this fusion shows up in the choices they make. They stay longer than they should. They forgive what should have ended things. They rationalize emotional neglect, disrespect, or imbalance by telling themselves that depth is supposed to hurt, that if it's easy, it must be shallow, that if it's painful, it must be meaningful. This mindset keeps them loyal to situations that slowly drain them. They become experts at endurance. They can carry emotional weight longer than most, convincing themselves that strength is measured by how much they can tolerate. But endurance isn't the same as fulfillment, and suffering isn't the same as depth. Still, letting go feels like betrayal, not just of others, but of their own identity. If pain has been the measure of meaning, then walking away feels like admitting it was all for nothing. There's also a subtle sense of control hidden inside suffering. Pain is familiar territory. It's predictable in its own way. Peace, on the other hand, feels uncertain. Calm feels empty. Happiness feels fragile, like something that could vanish at any moment. So they return again and again to what hurts, because at least there, they know how to survive. This is where emotional exhaustion sets in. Carrying pain as a badge of depth eventually hollows them out. They begin to feel tired in ways sleep can't fix. Joy feels distant. Motivation fades. They may start to feel numb, not because they lack emotion, but because their system is overloaded. The heart can only ache for so long before it shuts parts of itself down. Healing doesn't begin by erasing depth. It begins by redefining it. Depth is not measured by how much pain you can endure, but by how honestly you can listen to yourself, by how willing you are to leave what harms you, by how much gentleness you allow into your life without questioning its legitimacy. For someone who feels deeply, this shift can feel terrifying, like stepping into an unfamiliar identity. But meaning does not require suffering. Growth does not require wounds that never close. Love does not need to be proven through pain. When they finally allow themselves to experience depth without damage, something inside them begins to loosen. The nervous system softens. The heart learns a new language. Pain was never the proof. It was the cost of misunderstanding depth. For people who feel deeply, their sensitivity is often described as a gift, but rarely treated like one. Empathy, intuition, emotional intelligence, these qualities allow them to understand others without explanation, to sense pain before it's spoken, to offer comfort that feels almost surgical in its precision. They can sit with someone's darkness without flinching. They can see potential where others see damage. This depth allows them to connect, to create, to heal. But without protection, the same gift slowly turns against them. Because they feel so much, they often give too much. They listen longer, forgive faster, and stay when others would leave. They absorb emotions that don't belong to them, carrying other people's pain as if it were their responsibility. At first, this feels purposeful. Being needed feels grounding. Being the emotional anchor feels like identity. But over time, the weight becomes invisible and unbearable. Boundaries don't come naturally to them. Saying no feels like rejection, pulling back feels cruel, protecting themselves feels selfish. So they keep their emotional doors open, even when it costs them sleep, peace, and clarity. They become safe spaces for everyone else while slowly losing their own. This is how burnout begins. Not suddenly, but quietly. Manipulative personality. Ease are often drawn to them, not by coincidence, but by contrast. Where others take, they give. Where others avoid accountability, they take responsibility. Their depth becomes an open invitation to those who need emotional supply without offering reciprocity. And because they're so skilled at understanding pain, they often excuse harmful behavior, believing empathy will eventually fix what boundaries should have stopped. When the gift turns inward, it becomes dangerous. Self-blame replaces clarity. They question their reactions instead of the situation. They analyze their feelings instead of honoring them. Emotional insight turns into rumination. Intuition becomes doubt. They start believing that if they just understood more, gave more, endured more, things would finally make sense. Eventually, something breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically. It's a quiet collapse, a loss of motivation, a numbness where intensity once lived. They stop feeling inspired by the very depth that once defined them. This is the moment many mistake for failure, weakness, or depression, when in reality it's self-protection arriving too late. The turning point comes when they realize that depth without boundaries is not kindness, it's self-erasure. That empathy does not require self-sacrifice. That being sensitive does not mean being available to everyone. Their gift was never meant to be endlessly accessible. It was meant to be guarded, directed, and respected. Learning to protect their depth feels unnatural at first. It feels cold, unloving, wrong. But slowly something changes. Energy returns, intuition sharpens, emotional clarity replaces confusion. They begin to choose where their depth goes instead of letting it leak everywhere. And for the first time, sensitivity stops feeling like a liability and starts feeling like power. Their gift was never the problem. Unprotected depth destroys itself. Depth doesn't destroy you. Being unprotected does.